Do you remember your first time? Well, I don't have to remember, because this was mine. As first times go, it actually went pretty well. We were both a bit awkward at first, we weren't 100% sure we knew what we were doing, but we had enough fun that I wanted to do it again. This was the first podcast I ever recorded, before I found out about the importance of a good microphone or that I should avoid an echoey room. But it was a great conversation, and Adriano's insights into how big sporting brands use storytelling is well worth listening to. So please, forgive the sound quality and enjoy. Welcome to the Storypowers Podcast, the show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. I'm your host, Francisco Mahfuz. My guest today is Adriano Serff, who's one of the marketing heads at the yogurt giant Danone. He spent years at Nike and UnderArmour, so we'll talk about how storytelling has been used by the sporting companies to develop their brand image, attract and retain customers, and why that might not be so easy for every company out there to imitate. I had a lot of fun. If you do too, please leave us an iTunes review and let me know what you think. It'll really help make this show a fun listen for someone other than my mom. Ladies and gentlemen, Adriano Serff. Adriano, thanks for being on the podcast today. How are you doing, sir?
I'm very fine. Challenging times, but doing great. Thanks for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure.
For the people listening to this many years in the future, it's probably worth explaining that the challenging times is that we are on week 2 of a complete lockdown caused by a world pandemic. And I very much hope that if anyone listens to this 5 or 10 years in the future, it sounds as crazy to them as it sounds to us right now.
I don't even know exactly what you're talking about. The only thing I know for sure is that my girl here, my 3.5-year-old girl, is not going to school today, and that's my pandemic, my own pandemic. So trust me, it's crazy.
It's worth saying that you and I know each other. We're actually friends. We're friends, right?
Yeah, we're friends. We've been friends.
You can't ever be too sure about these things. But the reason I wanted to have you on the show was because you worked for more than 5 years at Nike, who is widely known as one of the first and most successful companies at using storytelling to guide their marketing and tell their brand story. You and I talked about it briefly, but we were more interested in drinking that day than getting into the subject properly. So I wanted to have you here and have a bit of that conversation. So what was your first contact with this idea of storytelling when you were at Nike?
Well, Nike, it's always concerned about the story. Nike thinks about the consumer. The consumer is at the center of everything they do. But the way they communicate with their consumers, it's through stories that they keep building over and over. So it might be a new product, an old product, an athlete, a huge sports event, whatever it is, they'll build a story around that to present that to consumers in a way that they'll feel engaged from the start through the end of that chapter. Nike, as other big brands that are very focused on stories, it's like a big book made by many different chapters. So every chapter there's a start and there's an end, and that it's easier. It's an easier way to get consumers through the entire book. So throughout my 5 years, we had many different chapters, especially with the categories that I was focused on. So it could have been about a very incredible running shoe that we were launching, or it could be about getting children that didn't have access to sport starting to run in their poor communities. So all that, if one aspect was focused with the consumer buying a shoe, or in the other aspect was getting a community around an idea, they were all made with a story as the backbone of what we were doing. So.
In this lingo of, you just said, that there's a book and there are chapters. I take it that this is how they described it at Nike.
Yeah, it's been changing throughout the years, but yes, like you'll hear a lot of marketeers from Nike and from other big brands like Apple or Under Armour, still in the sports world, that they'll use that lingo, saying like, "Hey, it's a full book and there are many chapters." So yeah, it's a known way of speaking internally.
When you joined them, were you aware that this was the case, or this was something that people at Nike started talking about, and in your head about what the hell is this thing? What are they going on about stories?
Yeah, Nike is a place that it's really focused on the learn by doing. So it's not that you get there and they'll make you like a huge presentation of like, hey, this is how we work. Like there's this 11 maxims that kind of guide them through the way they do business. None of them is it's about the story itself. It's more about their principles and how they do business. But that's something that is so inherent to everything they do that you learn by doing. And if you are a marketeer like that has that sense of building story, you'll probably find your place, and you'll probably find yourself within the team and within the company. And if you're not, you're probably going to be expelled, or you're going to find yourself not comfortable working there, and then you're going to leave. It's more of that, like especially working at a country level, you'll get in the country level. At the country level, I think it's important just to explain, like, everything is developed at the global level, and then it's scaled down at the different countries. Some countries, depending on their relevance throughout the years, they'll become more relevant where they'll be able to start the stories, to start a new chapter. And some of the other countries, they'll simply just plug and play a chapter that has already been written, just making small adjustments, some translations through their local audience. But throughout my almost 6 years with Nike, I had the opportunity to be on both different modes, both with global creating everything, and we just plug and play and adapt and translate, and also creating and driving the story. But it's like that. You're gonna get something that is already canned in a way that you simply understand the story, and that also makes so much easier for employee to understand what they're trying to achieve. So the story works not only for the consumers to get engaged and passionate about that brand, but also for a global team of marketeers of, I don't know, probably like 5 or 10,000 people globally to understand what they're trying to accomplish. So it works both ways.
It's one of the beautiful things about stories is that now it's become a bit of a buzzword, and people love talking about storytelling and brand stories and things of that nature. But you understand it when you see it. If I'm not mistaken, the very first commercial that Nike had that brought the "Just Do It" logo was a story. It was 1988, I think, and it was an older man running. I think he was running something like 17 miles a day or whatever, and he was running across a bridge. And now if you want to separate the parts of that story, you can, and you realize that the hero of that story is a common person, someone that everybody can relate to. But you don't need to know that. You just need to see it's an old guy running across a bridge. It's not a famous athlete running across a track.
Yeah.
And I think that this is something that it's the surprising thing about storytelling, but also one of the most amazing is that you don't need to know anything about it for it to work. But having said that, one thing I'm curious is you said they didn't present it that way for new people in the company. But if I recall correctly, you mentioned that they actually use storytelling or storyteller or something along those lines as a title for some of the people internally, didn't they?
Yeah, actually, there's one person that got that title. I'm going to speak about him in just a second. I just wanted to say something that is really interesting about Nike, is that, of course, when you talk and when you look at their commercials, at their video ads, most of them are beautiful examples of perfect storytelling, right? You see all the elements of beautiful story right there. Mm. But the interesting thing is that, especially if you're within their target for some of their campaigns, you'll get impacted by that storytelling on many different ways. That one of them will be a beautiful piece of video, but that story will be told by not only a beautiful piece of video, but also an event, and then also a store experience, and also a social media post, and also an influencer that is attending an event. So they build a story in a way that you get so many different impacts that helps you to build that journey on your mind, that's what make consumers love them even more. Like I said, of course, when you have an audio-visual piece such a video that is amazingly produced, that has body, has meat that you can really eat and digest that. But the way that they do it, it has all these different elements impacting people as they build things. Just want to make that quick comment. And regarding a question about storytellers, there is this one person that he is the person that is responsible for telling all Nike stories internally.
Right.
So that person, he tells a lot about he explains to new employee, to employee globally, how Nike was built and how they got from just two guys on a track to just regular dudes on the track to become a multi-billion-dollar company. And this guy has been a friend of them for over 40 years. And he has this title of, I don't remember exactly the title, but it was like King of Storytelling, something like that.
King of Storytelling.
It's something like that. And this guy, it's an older dude now. He's probably on his 70s or something. But I worked telling Nike story for many years. And I heard him explain in a Nike story how Nike was built for many times. And there's no one that could ever do that better than he can. He'll engage you in a way that very few people could. But anyway, it's not something that people will explain you how to do it. They will not tell you the method to build a story, but it's embedded in everything they're doing, and it starts with this, like the role that I used to work at Nike. It's called Iking, which is Nike spelled backwards, and it's because it's the people inside Nike that can talk about Nike's story from backwards. So you'll hear from people telling the story in so many different ways, but these are the responsible for spreading the story about Nike, which is part of why they're so successful. But no one ever taught me like, hey, this is how you need to tell the story, or these are the elements that a good story should have. I learned some of those in university, but when you're at Nike, that's like I said, embedded. So everything is built in that way, and then you learn by doing. Like I said, you really learn by doing.
It's interesting that because now when you look into anyone that is trying to apply storytelling to marketing, there's many different formulas. I mean, but one of the things that Nike does very clearly is this whole idea of they're not the heroes, the customer is the hero in the story. And I find it very interesting that they wouldn't make that explicit, because for someone who's not, if you're not familiar with the technical aspects of telling stories, it might not be obvious to you. You might be looking at a Nike commercial, enjoying it, not knowing exactly why you're enjoying it, and it would seem that somewhat almost risky that they would say, some people get it and they'll be able to work well within that structure, and some people perhaps won't get it. But it's almost baffling why they wouldn't sit you down and say, listen, here's the secret sauce. It's pretty basic. We twisted the hero's journey around a little bit, and you see that every single commercial works on the same parameter. But again, it has worked for a number of years, and unless you dig into it, you don't find this connection. It's not as if anyone relates the word storytelling to Nike unless you're into marketing, unless you're into storytelling. The customers, I don't think, have that idea.
No, I agree with you. And to be fair and give proper credit, Nike always, and again, just like any other big company, always work with amazing agencies that do a lot of the heavy work. So a good professional at a Nike marketing team it's someone that knows how to write the perfect brief. So a lot of a marketeer job at Nike is first to do a great plan. So you need to have it very clear what are all the assets that you have available, and then you're going to lay down the plan that you need to make whatever it is that you need to work. And that is talking specifically about advertising or creating, again, a piece of video, is writing an amazing brief and then picking the right partner that will be able to translate that brief into amazing video. So Nike was always kind of at the realm of making sure that the story was correct or was being told the right way. But always with the support of amazing agencies. That's one thing. And again, those agencies also have great storytellers on their teams that will work together with Nike. One that knows everything that the brand stands for and everything that they're trying to accomplish, and the other one knows more of the vertical aspects of creating a piece of video. But you said something that it's interesting as well, that is about the consumer not clearly knowing or being aware that he's actually at the center of whatever they're doing. And they do that even when they're talking about an athlete. Like you might see an ad about LeBron James, and it's just about LeBron James and his accomplishments, whatever new ring that he just got. But it's still about the consumer. It's still to inspire that consumer. It's still to make sure that the 11-year-old kid anywhere in the world see that and think that he might be him in the future and get him the right path to dedicate himself to sports. And of course, as a consequence, to buy a new pair of shoes. But again, the consumer doesn't know that the story was built in a way with so many elements that you'll build that story on your mind, and you're going to put yourself on that place. That's and that's something you're good at. That is telling a story in a way that you're not necessarily seeing the story. And I remember listening to many of your stories that I've never seen neither video or not even a PowerPoint. But I could still see myself in that restaurant in Dublin and watching everything that happened with you, your wife, and Javier Bardem, and I was never there. So people will have to buy.
The less we say about Javier Bardem, the better.
But people will have to look for you to know that full story. But again, I think that's the thing. Like it's a totally different way. But I've heard you telling this story probably 2 or 3 times, and now every time that I hear, I kind of feel myself somewhere in that restaurant, looking to everything happening there. And Nike and others, they will do this in a way that you'll see LeBron James there, and it's about one athlete. It's not about the consumer or the unknown older dude running throughout the city. But they want people to see themselves in that, or if worst scenario is to imagine them there. So that's really what they try to do.
Just to finish the chapter with Nike. So you were there, and Nike is a company that works in a very specific way, and their marketing works in a very specific way. And then you left Nike and you went to Under Armour. Now, how different was the experience of working at marketing at Under Armour and Nike? I mean, were there any similarities? Did they approach it in a completely different way, or how was that?
There are many similarities and one big difference. I'll start with the difference. The difference, especially when I joined Under Armour, which was back in 2013, almost 2014. Under Armour was not as successful as they became later on. They're not right now, but they became very successful. They had incredible growth in just a few years. But Under Armour was always known as the underdog or the runner-up. So nobody ever thought that they could do it, and they were making it. So while I was at Nike was not even thinking on any other competitor. Of course, they would pay attention to what other brands they were doing, but the only brand that they were really paying attention and concerned of every movement was Under Armour, although they were really, really smaller than Nike. The fact that Under Armour was not...
Why was that? Why were they paying attention to Under Armour?
First because they were doing so many things right, the consumers were starting to buy them. So they saw an approach that was different from what they were doing, and that's the underdog approach, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And they also saw a different approach of what Adidas was doing for the last so many years. So they were the first big American brand that had a similar approach to them, since they're both American, that was able to get closer or make an impact on their business. So they were making great product. They had signed great athletes, and they were doing something that Nike was always known for, which was putting consumers at the center of everything they do. So again, it comes back to to the way they were telling their stories was the same way. They were putting consumers, without telling them, but they were putting consumers at the center, so they would feel inspired, or they would see themselves as part of that story. But the biggest difference was, since they were the underdog, that the brand was known as the underdog, and that was widely known, especially in the US, that was widely known, people would relate to that as they were also the underdog. So in a different way, the Nike was always seen as a bit cocky, a bit the positive way of seeing Nike is dominant. It's great at everything that they were doing. That's the positive way of seeing things. And then there is the negative way, which was they were seen as cocky, like I'm always right. I never make a mistake. So both ways, right? While Under Armour was the runner-up, was the underdog, people were not expecting, and that's a lot what people would see themselves as. So, like, no one thinks that I can make it, but I'll go and make it. Under Armour used that to position themselves and to find athletes that would connect with that cult value, and then they were able to connect with a different set of consumers, or maybe even with the same consumers, but in a different way. So I'd say that this is the biggest difference. The way that they became a bigger brand put them in a position that they were able to tell their stories in a way that Nike never did. They were using the same tools and the same aspect. So if you see a piece of video from Under Armour, you'll see that a lot of the elements and the methodology of making a video, for instance, will be the same. They will put the hero. If we talk about the hero story, they'll put the hero in a different way that Nike would. Mostly because a lot of Nike heroes, they were already very, very successful. I'm going to take two examples on basketball. Nike had LeBron James for many years, and LeBron from the very, very beginning, since draft, he was already known to be one of the best players that was going to be. Under Armour's best athlete is Stephen Curry on basketball, and he was never known first, and second, he was skinny, not strong, not tall. He had none of the skills or the profile of a great basketball player, but they believed in him. They invested in telling his story. And to be honest, especially around the world, and especially in China, where he's now very famous, most of the people are not 2 meters tall and look like a wardrobe like LeBron James. Most people are even smaller than Stephen Curry. So, but still, like, it's much easier for me to connect with Stephen Curry and think that I can be Stephen Curry than to think that I can be LeBron James. So it's different way of telling the stories, but very similar approach.
And would you say that was strategic? Did they go out and search for athletes that would more easily fit the role of underdog than, or it's just that they couldn't get the top guys at the beginning, and it just so happened that some of the guys they got were more suited to the role that they were playing strategically?
To be honest, and I both at the time I wasn't with Nike, and then when I joined Under Armour, I was able to really see that happening. So to be honest, they were trying to find the ones that would have the perfect fit to what they were, the underdogs. So they were always trying to find underdog athletes. More than finding the next great, they were more interested in finding the underdogs that, of course, they wanted to be the next great as well, but they wanted the underdogs. However, if a Tom Brady comes up with an opportunity to sign a deal, they signed it. And Tom Brady is one of their athletes, and he was already very successful when they signed him. And or he was already a great promise. He was already supposed to be one of the best ever. So they have it both. But they were always more like, and even if you look at a brief of a sports marketing agent with Under Armour, you'll see if there is a check mark to say if they're an underdog or not. And many times we would sign athletes that they were not as successful, but they had an underdog mentality, attitude, or story. I remember before joining Under Armour global team, I was in Brazil. I was starting the Brazil business, and we signed this UFC fighter. That he was from a very poor community. Didn't have a lot of access to training, but he was crazily dedicated to his training routine, to his diet, to how he would sleep and everything. And especially in a country like Brazil, that would resonate a lot because it's the reality of a lot of people. Like, you don't have access to things. At the same time, if you were dedicated enough, you might be able to reach greatness at different levels. This guy never won UFC biggest tournament, but he won many different things that made him a very successful fighter in his world. So how do you call it? Finding underdogs was always part of the brief for Under Armour athlete finding.
Okay, and having worked with such very distinct approaches to marketing, I know you went on to do other things, and you're now going to start work in a completely different type of industry. How much of that type of approach that has story as the basis do you think it's something that can be implemented, or that you at least would try to implement it in other jobs you're in?
I mean, I would try to implement in as many jobs as I can, and I think Nike and other big brands are amazing marketing schools or they should be amazing marketing examples for a lot of other brands, because they nail the storytelling aspect of marketing. It's not easy to become such a powerful storyteller as Nike or as Under Armour or as others, because they have a lot of assets. They work with something that is very inspiring, that is a sport, sports are inspiring. And even if you're not so much into sports, it's easy to get inspired by. It's totally different from selling, a computer, even water, and selling sports. And I was talking, we just explained what is happening with the world today in end of March 2020. For people listening to this in 5-10 years, all major sports tournaments are canceled or postponed. Even the Olympics is postponed. So Nike relies and depends a lot on sports moments. And they do that because there are so many people connected. There are so many people with high expectations of the athletes and the teams and federations' performances. So people already create that expectation in their minds. So Nike uses a lot of that to create their stories around. So they use what is already on consumers' mind, and they keep building on top of that. So that's why it makes so much easier for Nike to do that. So if you ask me if I wanted to replicate or to take those learnings and use to sell waters, like you said, my next challenge coming next, I will try to bring as many elements as possible to my new challenge. But to be honest, it's totally different, and it's much harder when you don't have all these assets that Nike or any other sportsman works with. what one can do is to really take the platform of storytelling and identify what are the things that in any other business it could be used to build a story. So, say if you have an athlete, or if you have a federation, or if you have a sports moment like the Olympics coming for Nike, what are those elements for your industry, for your business? How can you get something that Nike did and try to identify those in your world, and then work with people that are great storytellers to help you to build that narrative for you? Because in the end of the day, regardless of what you're selling, people will connect and they will stay engaged with your brand if you're telling something that they're interested in. If you simply present a product, the product can be the best product ever, but that will be a short-term engagement that you'll create with your audience, whatever product that is. If you're able to tell a story about that product and that story never ends and it's connected to, like we said in the beginning, to a new chapter, I think that's when you can create ambassadors for brands. You can take your consumers, your clients, or your audience to the next level of loyalty. Nowadays, especially with the younger generation, they'll switch from brands much easier than older generations would. But they, at the same time, they want to be connected through stories. They want to be connected to something meaningful to them. And if you're able to identify what are those elements that you have that are relevant to your audience, that's when you have your lethal weapon to use with consumers. That's what I think that I can definitely take my learnings from those companies that are very specialized and use storytelling at the best level and apply to any other business that I might be involved with in the future.
Okay, and on that note, Adriano, thank you so much for your time. This was great.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves, and until next time.